Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Mindel, and I'd like to welcome you to the work, Straight Talk on Craft and Method. And this is a little segment of the work, which I'm calling At Work. And today I'm at work with Rami Schandall. Welcome, Rami.
Hi,
um,
Maria.
so, you do so much.
I do
I'm
so much.
talking in this section about present day artists of all disciplines. And you do a lot of different things. Would you like me to mention them? Or do
Sure,
you?
you can start the
Okay.
list.
So as far as I know, you teach yoga and meditation. You're a writer. You make things. You do fabric art, ceramics, painting, photography. Anything more you want to add to that list?
That about covers it. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's almost like the material uh or the genre doesn't matter so much. It's the inquiry into the material that keeps me fascinated. So I think that's the current list. I do also do sound work, music and improvisation. And I do that in concert with my poetry and my husband, who's a musician. Um, that hasn't been public for a while, but yeah.
Yeah, so that is a lot. That is a
Mhm.
lot of things. And I just want to interject because you already started to answer my next question. And so I want to let you go with that, run with that. But to me, it's also just what is it today in this particular moment, right? Because that's, I think, art moves along. So that your practice may move along. But I'd like to ask you, and you've already started to talk about how these practices relate to each other.
Mhm. Yeah, I've had a kind of an interesting dance with how things relate. In that I've always felt like they must relate, they do relate, but I also get kind of into a pattern or a groove with a particular form, and at times forget about the others and forget those aspects of my ways of exploring. And then I remember and put them together and sparks fly and it's super exciting. And then every time I think, oh, I have to remember to keep integrating. Um, so it's this kind of dance of drilling down into a particular medium or method or practice for a period of time and then remembering or maybe even having kind of a hunger for the other ones and then that will often be pointing to some relationship that is not super obvious but has yeah some kind of charge to it.
In terms of the order, and we could talk about order in time, like did one of these come first?
Mm.
Or is there an order in the sense that you consider yourself primarily, say, a fabric artist who happens to
Mm.
move into clay? Or so is there one that comes first, or is there an order?
Um, I mean, I think one of the traps for me has been that art was drawing and painting, and craft was working with my hands in other ways. So knitting, sewing, embroidery, that kind of thing. And as a young person, that was quite distinct in the way that I um, thought of art and craft. Um, and I dove deep into painting and drawing as a like the legitimate place to put my art energy and studied art history. And then and then I became a graphic designer and got really visually burnt out actually and stopped making art, stopped making visual art, was making more music because that felt separate from my daily job. And then I started to come back to art, capital A art, through my hands, through ceramic and returning, that was also a return, but moving in a really experimental direction with porcelain. And at the same time, I've always been playing with fiber. I don't really sew or do those traditional um, fabric things these days, but I think it's wanting to drill down. So I was knitting for a long time, more and more and more complex patterns. And I was like, well, I'd really actually like to get into the fiber, like spinning it. And so I started to spin. And then you start to accumulate a lot of yarn that I better learn to weave. So I am currently weaving and knitting, and I have a spinning wheel from Norway that it's 100 years old or something. And but then also feeling like that pulls too much into just this kind of traditional domestic arts, and how does it talk to conceptual work? And so it's just this dance. Like, whichever way I'm going, there I'm complicating and deepening it all the time, and that leads to the next thing. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
I'm fascinated with this idea of visual burnout.
Hmm.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think I mean literally my eyes got tired, but also I got into design and got very precise about the detail and the kind of perfection that I was creating on screen. Mostly, we're working on a digital surface. And and then I was disconnected from my craft, my skills as a visual artist enough that I guess what happened was that my design eye got more critical and superior to my artist's eye, and I would have an idea and go and try and render it in art and be totally dissatisfied. And so I went through kind of a cruel period of calling myself a failed artist and just like let it go, give it up, because it was so sad, frustrating. Um, yeah, and I think I kind of had to do that. I had to like let go of what expectations I had of art, and then come back to it even more as an identity. Like I just am an artist. That is a fact. And so what I do is art.
You mentioned earlier inquiry, and maybe I'll just share with our listeners a quote from your that accompanied your Fold series of ceramics online, and I'll include a link to that in the notes. So here's the description that is on your website. The framing question for this ongoing project was, how much can porcelain behave like cloth? It became also how much like body, how much like landscape, mountain folds against the sky. And I was really fascinated. This project sort of began with a question, and the others that you introduce seem to begin with a creative constraint, as it were, in the sky portal, where you kind of set yourself the task of at a certain time of day, you're going to look out a certain window, take a photograph in this durational project. So can you say more about this constraint-based way of working or question-based, or you might use the word inquiry as you already have?
Mm. Yeah, I'm not sure which comes first, the inquiry or the constraint. Probably the curiosity is there, and then there's like a methodological constraint that helps me dive deeper into the project, into the inquiry, by having a container. And that's really really important for me, to sustain work. And I didn't find that process or that relationship until quite late, after I decided I was a failed artist and came back to it. um, it was in that period that I did a class with a wonderful local teacher, whose name I should have written down and have not got it in my head right now, but on developing series. And it was a 12-week course that looked at different ways of meeting the blank page. And they were all different kinds of constraints. And that was so productive for me, so generative. Yeah, and the Sky Project, Sky Portal is a really good example. That continues to be a project that fuels me. And it began with even just kind of testing myself. Can I do one thing every day with total commitment and regularity? And that was to take a picture of the sky every single day and then post it and date it and then see what happened. And I was going to do that for 100 days, and I wound up getting hooked and doing it for 1,000 days. And then I had 1,000 photographs. What do you do with 1,000 photographs? How do you convey this thing beyond the Instagram profile where it was living? And yeah, it's just continued to fuel different projects. It's had many iterations now. I wound up turning it into kaleidoscopic patterns printed on silk. So that was not what I was thinking at the beginning at all. It's just like, yeah. So the constraints led to a certain end, and then there's another question still there, so that I keep coming back. And then eventually the question is this done? And maybe the answer is yes. But yeah, constraints are very helpful, especially as an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, doing a lot of different things kind of person. It helps me have a sense of firmness about what, at least, this project is this for now. And yeah, and then it just adds up. I did another piece, which I called Body Language, which was just a daily watercolor impression of what it felt like to be me in my body. And this is maybe a Feldenkrais kind of inspiration. I noticed my center and my limbs and my head, and I would do a splotch of water for each of those things and then put color into it and see what happened. And I did that every day during the pandemic for 70 days. And I wound up with this amazing series of funny little creatures. Sorry. Um, people that no longer look like me at all. But they have a life of their own, and the project has its own life because I did it every day for 70 days. Yeah.
And do you ever use constraints when it comes to your word-based
Yes.
art? Word-based art, writing, I mean.
Writing, yeah. Poetry, especially poetry, yeah. Yes, I
Mm.
do. Yeah, and those I love also. Yeah, one of my favorite generative practices is I think it came from Barbara Guest and called The River of Words. And it's sitting and listening to readers or conversation and noting words as they come through, and not engaging too literally at all with any of it, and letting it just pour onto the paper. And that's a way of finding, again, these voices that are not my voice, but create a resonance with me. And I curate what comes through, and those become the poems. Yeah, and then there's a tension with, I'll give myself rules, constraints, and they work really well for a time, and then there will be some friction with it, and I have to decide, am I keeping with that constraint, or is it time to change the constraint, or blow it open and see what happens. One of the constraints for me for a long time was to avoid anything that turned into narrative in the poem, and then I decided to change that rule a little bit, and allow some narrative in, and then yeah, it's like when to cut it off, when to stop, how much to leave meaning kind of on the cliff edge, and when to have it land.
I love the use of the term curation there. It seems to weave through a lot of the practices you're talking about, right? Curation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, craft and method, anything that those terms stir up for you in your own practice or your curiosity these days could be something
Mhm.
that you want to pursue. How do you relate to
Yeah,
those?
I was having a think about those words, and I wonder if yeah, method and process are the things that I'm most engaged with. And that keeps me in a beginner's mind state in a way. I'm constantly experimenting with things that often don't work. And I wonder if I have any craft at all, any skill. Um, I don't think that's quite true, but yeah, I think that the craft that I'm honing is how to stay open and keep the channels open, keep the flow, my creative flow and energy moving. Um, yeah, and methods are helpful, important tools for that. Um, but I feel like I'm constantly revising, constantly changing, changing how that works. Mhm. I think particularly, in porcelain where experimenting leads to a lot of failure. It's so conspicuous, you can invest a huge amount of energy into pieces that break literally. And then what? What do you do with that? So, yeah.
So, would method for you mean an approach and a way of doing things, or is it like a method with a capital M in some way?
I wouldn't give it a capital M. I think it's
Okay.
yeah. um, yeah, it's an approach, but then the specific methods of I guess maybe the constraints are the method for any particular project. Hmm. And I mean, obviously there's the method for spinning and weaving and painting and writing, and they're all quite different, but mhm. But there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of continuity between each medium for me. And cross-pollination, constant cross-pollination. Yeah. Yeah, and then back to the body too. I mean, as a yoga teacher and practitioner and contemplator, I listen a lot to, what calls to me. I've had a number of pieces lately that have had rocks in them because the rocks were like, they've got to be part of this. I don't know why. They're just coming in as the thing that needs to be there inside a fragile ceramic vessel or on top of a poem. Like it just something is exciting about that relationship. Mm.
So much trust there.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm continuing to cultivate. Trust.
Rami, it's so wonderful to talk to you, and we could go on and on, but maybe we should leave it at that for today. And just, is there anything that you would like people to know? Any forthcoming events or things that are projects that you're going to take on? Anything like that?
Sure. I mean, I have a rock poem coming out in the White Wall Review in the summer. So that's my first visual poem, photography and the artwork of that went into writing a poem. That feels like something to watch for or share. Yeah, and if people like um, my work, it's some things are for sale on my website. Printed silk is for sale on my website. But
You
those
do
are
have
the
a beautiful website. It is beautiful and also pretty easy to navigate, and those two things don't always go together. So your fatiguing life as a web designer is still serving.
helping me now.
Yeah.
I'm corralling it to help me.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And yeah, I really encourage people to take a look at Rami's online home and anything else that you happen to put into the world.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the interview.